Hello, my name is Michael Leone and I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources at Pittsford Schools. Today, I'm going to discuss how human resource functions impact the overall school budget. Before we get into the details, it's important to step back and remember our guiding principles of what we do before we get into how we do it. And our guiding statement is really our mission statement, which reads, "The Pittsford Central School District community works collaboratively to inspire and prepare our students to be their best, do their best, and make a difference in the lives of others." With that as our guiding statement, we then move into how we accomplish that, and in this case, specifically through the budgeting process. Well, I'm going to be talking about this through the human resources lens. There are a number of people that we work with in order to collaboratively come up with the decisions that we make. And those involve folks at all different levels of the school and as well as other stakeholders. When looking at the primary areas of responsibility for human resources, they're in these 5 big buckets. There's personnel processes and matters. There's sectioning and staffing. There's labor relations and contract administration, onboarding and leadership development, and administrator and teacher evaluation. Overall, the department's budget is just shy of $380,000. which, when compared to the overall school budget, is a small portion, making up 0.3%. However, in certain areas, especially in sectioning and staffing and contract negotiation and administration, there is a significant impact on what overall happens in the budget. Now, in discussing sectioning and staffing, we are looking at the following process. We start with the superintendent providing guidance and parameters on where we need to be budget-wise. Once we have those parameters, there are meetings with principals and directors. Usually that is done with principals by level, so elementary, middle, and high school. That there are conversations with our assistant superintendent for instruction and standards leaders, especially around instructional guidance and what's needed in those areas. We have multiple conversations with our business office throughout the process. And then once we have all that information, we set the number of sections. And sectioning generally drives professional staffing and paraprofessional needs, as well as indirectly impacting support staff. So when we are talking about sectioning is the process by which we determine how many sections of a particular course will run. So using an elementary example, if we have an elementary school, we will look at 5th grade, we'll look at the number of overall 5th grade students we have, and we'll make a determination of how many sections there should be. So for example, should we have 3 5th grade sections, 4 5th grade sections, 5 5th grade sections, and again, there's a number of considerations that we will talk about. At the high school or middle school, sectioning may look like this. Say we have art. Art for 7th grade. How many kids do we have, and how many sections of art should that be? And then how do they run? Does it run every other day? Does it run every day? So those are the number of sections that we run. Scheduling, where students are provided the order of their classes and which classes they report to, is done at the building level, and that is overseen by the principal and the principal's team. So again, sectioning, setting the number of sections, is done at the central office in collaboration with our buildings, whereas scheduling is done at the building level, led by the principal. When we are engaging in sectioning and staffing, we are balancing a number of considerations. And up on the screen, perhaps except for graduation requirements, they're not in any particular order of importance. Obviously, graduation requirements is a very important consideration. Safety nets. What that means is some students may want to push themselves in a more advanced class, and ultimately may decide that that class is not proper for them. So to use an example, say that a student was signed up for AP World, which also is a graduation requirement under the Global 10 regions, but is a more difficult course, more challenging course. So the student goes into AP World, and the student finds, for whatever reason, that this course is a little too rigorous for them, and they would be better served by moving to the Global 10 regions course. So making sure we account for things like that. Late registrants. Every year we have students that move into our district over the summer, and they need to be accommodated. Student choice. That is something that has been traditional in our school, and something that the Pittsford schools has been committed to, allowing students to be able to pursue what they're excited about, what they want to explore, and being able to really give a good amount of student choice, which goes right along with the commitment to electives. We have an incredibly robust electives program that offers so much to our students, and again, that high commitment to continuing that. We do have contractual requirements that we're bound by. We have physical space limitations that we need to be aware of and accommodate. And we are looking at meeting a continuum of student needs. So we could have some students that need a very high level of support, maybe such a high level that they would be in what's called a self-contained class. We could have other students that are in the general education setting but need some extra supports within that classroom, and how do we meet that? We have some students who may want to challenge themselves and take on a more rigorous caseload, and we have some students who are in the gifted realm that we also want to make sure we have appropriate course offerings for them. We have our continued commitment to best practices, and how do we continually improve, as one of our core values, continuous improvement. Safety considerations. If we have students that are in a technology class in which they're using power tools, we want to make sure that we have the right ratios. What we need in order to meet the new learning standards, what SED regulations require, especially when there's new regulations that are put in place. What are the parent and community expectations for our schools, and even things like traveling teachers when we have teachers that are going amongst buildings. Well, this list is not exhaustive. It does give a good overview of what the numerous considerations we're looking at when it comes to sectioning and staffing. Now, just to delve a little deeper into the complexities of sectioning and staffing, for the 2016-17 school year, just at the two high schools, so 2,000 students, we had 19,590 class requests. So what happens is students go to the program of study night, and at that point they sign up for the classes that they either are required to take or when there's electives, what they would like to take. And as a result of that, last year we had 19,590 individual requests. And this includes the idea that we sometimes have semester courses where a student will take one course the first semester, a different course the second semester. So an individual student could easily make 9, even 10 requests. So in order to go through those and meet as many of these as we can, and while we would love to meet every single request, that isn't something we can do, but we do meet the vast majority. The 2 high school principals and I sit down for 2 full days going through the various requests in order to determine what sectioning we would come up with. I want to now take you through how we would determine the number of sections, and I'm going to do both an elementary and a high school example. And I want to show you the math and some of the limitations that go along with it, or I should say considerations that go along with it, and how, while there can be some flexibility in the number of kids, there is not a one-to-one ratio of enrollment to number of sections. Certainly there's a correlation, but it's not a necessarily a close correlation. So in this example, we have a 4th grade elementary school class. Now the maximum class size for 4th grade is 28 children. So that means 3 sections could accommodate up to 84 children, where 4 sections could accommodate up to 112 children. And it's good to note that this allows for a swing of 27 kids within a section, which is important to have some sort of flexibility, again, if kids move in or if there are changes. So for this example, say we have in year 1 108 kids in 4th grade, which would result in 4 sections. In the next year, year 2, we have 86 kids in 4th grade. In that case, that would also require 4 sections. Showing it in a different way, these charts will see when we have 108 kids, that puts us in the upper end of 4 sections, where 86 kids puts us in the lower part of 4 sections. Now when we do the number of sections, we balance them so each of the 4 sections would be substantially similar. But what this shows is a change from one year to the next has a 22 student swing, but still requires 4 sections. Now for our high school example, there are some additional considerations that we have to look at. First, this will be a Global 10 example. Global 10 has a maximum class size of 29 students. Global 10 is a graduation requirement, so students must take and pass this in order to graduate from high school. In our example, we're going to say we have 87 students signed up. Of those 87 students, 11 of the students have the requirement of an integrated co-taught class on their IEP. And so these would be students who have been identified as needing special education services. One of the special education services is having an integrated co-taught class. When we have an integrated co-taught class, the maximum amount in the class is 24. It should also be noted that by state regulation that you can have no more than 12 students with integrated co-taught on their IEPs in any one class. And the whole reason for that is this is to be a co-taught class where you have children that need special education students learning right alongside students who don't have special education needs in this area. And if it was to go beyond 12, then the class starts looking more like a self-contained class rather than a co-taught class. Also, for our example, we're going to say there's 124 students signed up for AP World, which is a Global 10 substitute for a graduation requirement and is a more accelerated course. Over the past several years, our data team has been doing great work in looking at the analytics of each one of our classes, and we have been able to see trends or averages of how many students will drop or add in certain classes. So in this case, what we know from the analytics is that 10 to 12 students will drop from AP World to Global 10 or move in as new registrants. So whatever number we have, and in this case 87 students, we know from the analytics that over time we can expect an additional 10 to 12 students will have to be added to Global 10. So instead of really 87 in September, we'll probably have more 97 to 99 students. Again, looking at this example in a more graphic form, you can see that we have 4 sections in either case. So we start out with 87 students, which still puts us in overall 4 sections, because remember, Section 1, which we've designated as our integrated co-taught class, has a cap of 24 instead of 29. The 99 that is highlighted under Section 4 represents the numbers that we believe will ultimately be in Global 10 because of our background and the analytics that have been done by our data team. The yellow highlighted of 12 shows the maximum of number of students who have IEPs requiring integrated co-taught for Global 10. Please keep in mind that if we, instead of having 11 students, if we had 13 students with integrated co-taught, then Section 2 would also become an integrated co-taught section, which would then also have a cap of 24. Now in our example, we started out with 87 students signing up for Global 10. If we changed that example and had 82 students sign up for Global 10, theoretically we could start out with 3 sections. However, knowing the analytics and knowing that 10 to 12 students will be added, we would be setting up ourselves for some difficulties, because what we know is that in September we are almost assuredly going to be over that 82 number, requiring a 4th section, and then we would have to add a section and change schedules at the start of the school year, which is disruptive to our students, and we don't want to do that unless absolutely necessary. Now, what we will also do when we are looking at sections, and I talked about in this case how our analytics show that 10 to 12 will drop down or move in. Well, sometimes we have a section, and I'm going to use an example, say that our maximum number of students in a section are 29, and we have 31 students signed up. So in that case, we are 2 students over the maximum amount, but if we look at the analytics and we know that generally 5 to 6 students drop the class or move out of the class to take a different class, then what we will do is only run 1 section, knowing that in September that we will be under that number. The other thing that we will sometimes do is when we have to cap classes like that, we will look at classes, especially say there's electives and we have sophomores that are signed up for the class. So again, I'll use my example. Say we have 31 kids signed up. We have a max of 29, but of that 31 kids, we have a half a dozen kids who are sophomores. What we would do is work to move the sophomores out of the class in order to get it under the cap, with the idea that those students still have 2 more years in their high school career to make sure to have the opportunity to take that elective. And again, these are the things that we go through when we're talking about what sectioning should be, and keeping mindful that we want to balance all those original considerations that we talked about, yet doing it responsibly within our budgetary limitations and in a sustainable way. So the ways in which we see continuous improvement, as I talked about during the examples, we have done a lot of work with the data team to get the analytics about tracking add and drops in every single class that we offer over a period of time. This really helps us better target class sizes at sectioning. Last board meeting, our Chief Information Officer did the enrollment projections. The enrollment projections the district has been doing over a number of years have had an incredibly high percentage of accuracy, well into the upper 90%. And we use these enrollment projections for our long-term planning. We always look for opportunities to refocus or reorganize staffing in a way that delivers instruction in the very best way, and in a way that also lets us stay within the limits that our resources require. We work with principals to rebalance class sizes as appropriate. Last year, I worked with the 2 high school principals to do an audit of our elective programs to make sure that we were at the right size of the classes, that they were balanced, and that there was equity amongst the 2 schools. We also look at things that make sense from a sectioning standpoint, such as identifying and modifying every other year class offerings. We will have some classes that if we were to offer it every year, the amount of signups would be low and therefore would not necessarily justify running a section. However, if we run them every other year, we find that the signups are much more robust, and again, allow that student choice, keep that commitment to the robust electives that we have, yet do it in a way that makes sense within our staffing and sectioning rules. We also have created magnet schools for certain programs, which has been good from an educational standpoint and has allowed us to maximize our resources. One good example is how our Student Services Department has worked to create magnet schools for our English language learners, which has been a very positive outcome for our students and has helped us to sustain our staff. And finally, we also look to leverage technology for class combinations. So for example, if we have, and I use a high school example because it's more straightforward. Say we have a class that is running at Sutherland, or a class that is potentially offered at Sutherland High School and Mendon High School. And I have 8 students signed up for the class at Sutherland High School and 9 students signed up at Mendon High School. It may not make sense to run a class with that number of students, 8 at Sutherland, 9 at Mendon. But if we can combine those 2 classes, and now we have 17 students in one section, that makes much more sense. So how do we make that happen? How do we leverage technology in order to make that happen? And we look for those type of opportunities when they exist. Again, keeping true to the idea of all of those considerations, allowing students to really take what is inspiring to them and what is important to them, and at the same time doing it in a sustainable way. And again, this just goes back to all those considerations. Again, as we can look through that, hopefully some of these bullet points have come to life a little bit more through this presentation, and how we're trying to balance that, and really how do we get there, while never losing the idea of what or why we do, that idea of preparing students to be their best, do their best, and make a difference in the lives of others. Taking all that into account, it's also important to look at enrollment and staffing trends. And as I referenced earlier in the presentation, there is not a one-to-one correlation between enrollment and staffing. And when we look back at the sectioning examples, we can see why. In both of those examples, there could be a swing of 12 to 22 students, and they have no change on that one individual number of sections. Take that, multiply that by 9 schools, and you can see why there could theoretically be easily a couple hundred student change over our entire district, but not necessarily have the same corresponding change in sectioning or in staffing. And that works both ways, both from an increase and a decrease. But looking back 3 years, one of the things we have been able to do is to maintain sustainable staffing. When we look back 3 years ago, our enrollment was 5,725 children. This year, it's 5,685 children. And that comes from the district enrollment study that was just presented at the last board meeting. So that's a reduction of 40 kids across the district, or 0.7% change. For staffing in that same period of time, we have had roughly 14 full-time staff positions been reduced, and which is a 1.2% change. Again, neither of those changes are large, but what it does show is we do have sustainable staffing, and so there are sometimes questions of, why is our enrollment going down, but our staffing is staying the same or going up? And that is not the case. We are maintaining sustainable staffing. Now, long-term sustainability is not just in sectioning and staffing, although that certainly is a significant impact. When we look at long-term sustainability, there are certain pressures that we need to be aware of. And the first is that the job market is getting more competitive with a better economy. And while it's good that the economy is getting better, that does create competition. And when that is put together with the well-documented teacher shortage, those are things we need to keep an eye on. I am very pleased to report that Pittsford continues to be a very desirable place to work, and our reputation does still recruit wonderful prospects to our district. But again, something to keep in mind. Also, during the past 12 months, 1/3 of organizations increased their overall benefit offerings. That becomes somewhat of a pressure, especially when it comes to contract negotiations. And then some other state legislation or mandates, such as the significant minimum wage increase and the New York State tax cap legislation limitations. And while I am certainly not making any comment either way of whether the tax cap is a good thing or not, what causes some stress is that the tax cap does have some relief valves as part of it. So, for example, if we have our mandated New York State retirement contribution, again, that is not something we as a district get to choose. We are told by New York State this is how much you're going to contribute for our employee retirement. If that goes above 2% in any year, there is a relief valve in the tax cap legislation that helps to modify the cap. Unfortunately, when other legislation or mandates come down, there is no release valve. So, for example, well, minimum wage is a requirement and we must follow that, there is no relief valve in the tax cap for that requirement. Also, when new SED regulations come down requiring us to modify programs, which de facto requires us to add staff, there's no relief valve that goes along with that in the tax cap. So that does cause pressure that we have to be aware of. Now, in order to be proactive, we have done a number of things, and these actions have been taken with an eye on long-term sustainability. So we continue to negotiate contracts that allow us to be responsive to future unknowns while maintaining positive labor relations, and again, balancing those various factors. But one of the important things when we're looking at contracts is not to put such narrow, negotiate such narrow provisions that we can't be nimble and responsive if something significant happens in the future. We look to continue to moderate the impact of ever-increasing benefit costs through sharing increases equitably with our employees, and we seek contractual and benefit modifications that have long-term impacts. So in certain cases, we may seek provisions that when a more senior person retires and the new person comes in, that there's a restructure in some of the benefits, which does allow long-term savings. And well, these actions by themselves have not been the reason. They have certainly been a big part of why we've been able to maintain our overall benefit increases to an average of 3.3% over the last several years, which when you look at the average increase in benefit costs, especially like healthcare, that in the private sector is oftentimes in the double digit, and even in the idea of where we've done great work around a consortium and things like that, still in the upper single digits, 7-8%. 3.3% is very good. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'm happy to try to answer what I can. I would like to finish where I started. Well, this was the how of what we do. We never want to forget the what or the why of what we do. And that, again, ends with our mission statement that the Pittsford Central School District community works collaboratively to inspire and prepare our students to be their best, do their best, and make a difference in the lives of others. Thank you.